What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight we are joined by two Oklahoma hammers. We got Bradley Hallman, the BFE master, and John Soukup over there tearing it up everywhere he goes. He can't not finish in the top 10 in the tournament nowadays. Low key, like the most on fire bass fisherman in the country. Like, I don't know if you guys know, but like, he is dominating every tournament he fishes. Doesn't matter if it's a Tuesday night jackpot, if it's an NPFL tournament and open, doesn't matter. He's on it. So excited to have you guys on tonight and talk some serious tournament bass fishing.
Yeah, dude. Super appreciative to be here, man. First time with you, Johnny. Very first time for me. I don't know about John, but it is first time for me, dude. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, actually, I'm a veteran of this, Bradley. Welcome to Johnny's show.
Johnny's show.
Well, man,
I have a question for Johnny. I put it out there for everybody. Why did Bradley have 62 and I had 37? The best result I had was our age. People were guessing that Bradley was 62 and I was around 37 years old.
So I was wondering the same thing. What was that?
So let me let you in on a secret. 95% of statistics are made up, including that one. And so I find that that's very helpful in getting people to click on the video. But I feel confident that you guys are going to enjoy the content here. So even if you were clickbait just a tiny bit, stay with us because the information in this live stream is going to be worth it. I can promise.
That's the only reason I'm here. I was like, why did I have 37%?
He would, as competitive as he is. He's probably mad about it, like thinking about it. But I did. I looked at that and I was like, what the hell is that?
Well, we're going to jump into it. Before we get into it, guys, we start talking. We're going to be talking a little bit to start off here about how these guys decide whether to fish shallow or offshore in a tournament day or a fishing day. We're going to get into all that. And then we're going to let the rabbit holes go where they may. You guys know on my stream, when we get talking about serious bass fishing topics, we just go wherever the conversation flows. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Just to start off, before we do, got to give a huge shout out to the sponsors of the Fish the Moment live stream and the podcast. First up, huge shout out to Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford Foods has been sponsoring the podcast for over almost a year now, and we really appreciate all the support that they give us here. If you guys want a great snack to take to the lake, then definitely go check them out at Walmart. They have them at Dollar General, local gas stations. Anywhere you can go, you get some great beef jerky. Best thing about Bridgeford, other than just being a great snack for the boats, is that they support bass fishing. And if you guys like to support companies that support your passion, support bass fishing, support this industry, check out Bridgeford Foods. There's not that many non-endemic sponsors or companies that aren't fishing companies that support bass fishermen. So definitely check out Bridgeford Foods. They're a great company run by great people, and they support fishing. Another sponsor of the live stream is actually on the stream with us right now, John from the Bass Tank. We actually have the Bass Tank representing. I feel left out because I don't have my Bass Tank hat on. I don't have enough gear on right now for the Bass Tank, but John, part owner of the Bass Tank, and they're the best bass fishing electronics installation company in the country. And I'll let John talk about here in just a second, but I do want to let you guys in on one deal because there's a great deal that they have going on. If you head to thebasstank.com, they just redid this website. It looks fantastic. Great job. Their job. If you go to the products page and then you head over here to the Garmin Fish Finders by brand, you'll find some awesome deals right now on some of these Garmin units. And the best deal that you can find on this website is if we scroll down here, you can find a 93 SV. We're going to keep scrolling. You guys redid the website, so I don't know where all this stuff is setting up.
The hot new items aren't on the front page yet. We're
there we go. Back. This is it. Oh, okay. So we got the refurbished, but we got the 93 SV that you can get for $2,000 with a live scope. You got every combo you could ever want. But basically, for $2,000, guys, you can get a Garmin live scope with a Garmin unit for around $2,000, which is a great deal if you guys want a live scope. And you can also get the 93 SV unit for, I think, $699, which is an awesome deal on a great fish finder. So definitely check that out, thebasstank.com. Give them a call. They have a great sales team there. You can talk to someone who knows bass fishing, and we'll get you set up right with the right equipment. Huge shout out to the Bass Tank and to John for supporting the live stream as well. Anything else to add there, John, while we have you?
Yeah, man, stay tuned. We're going to have some cool classic deals. We can talk about those later, but Lowrance has stepped up and given us some good opportunities too. So if you're a Lowrance guy, and we definitely got some cool Garmin things. So I appreciate the shout out, Johnny. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate all the support as well. Well, let's just jump into it. That was enough of our talking at the beginning. I want to get into the meat of the topic, and I'm going to kind of tee this up for you guys just to give the audience a little background of where I want to go with this conversation, and then I'm just going to let you guys run with it. So if you guys don't follow tournament bass fishing or know about these guys, they are both extremely versatile fishermen. Bradley is really well known across the industry as being an extremely versatile angler. He has had some really big wins and some top finishes fishing shallow. He has a bait with big bite baits, the BFE. Whoa, John.
It's okay.
The blackout
it's
over there.
Okay.
Oh, okay, we're good.
It's okay.
We're good. Wow, scaring us over here. And he's got this the BFE, the best flipper ever. He designed for big bite baits. Great flipping bait. Definitely check that out if you guys haven't. So he's known for flipping, but he's also extremely versatile fishing offshore, using his Garmin Livescope, his electronics, and you can actually follow his YouTube channel, Bradley Hallman Fishing. It has great YouTube videos he puts out talking about all these topics. So, well-rounded angler. John is the exact same way. He's known as the Livescope guru. He's known for catching them with his electronics, but he was also raised in Oklahoma. He was the angler of the year in a lot of the local trails around here, winning tournaments, things like that, fishing up shallow, flipping, shallow water, top waters, spooks, whopper ploppers. That's how John really loves to fish as well, but he's really good with the electronics. So both these guys have skill sets that allow them to fish both ways. And I'm really interested to see how both of them make the decision when they go to a tournament and they have 3 days of practice and then they have a tournament day to fish. How do you know whether to fish offshore or fish up shallow or use your electronics or just go flip down the bank? How do you make that decision? And I think there's going to be a lot of, it depends on the lake and where we are and all that stuff. But I want to hopefully by the end of the stream get some really good takeaways as we talk through this topic of how you guys at home can actually make that decision if you are on the fence, whether you want to fish shallow or fish offshore. So I guess whoever wants to start off, maybe let's talk about that recent tournament in Florida where you both fished, because you both fished this Bassmaster Open in Florida. Mm-hmm. I think you fished pretty different styles, so maybe you could both walk us through how you landed there and how you made your decision.
You'll go first, John, or you want me to?
I mean, I can let you go first, but I can tell you real quick why I didn't fish shallow.
Get it.
Go for it.
I didn't fish shallow because Bradley's the best flipper in the world. And we talked every day, and I was like, how many bites you got? And he's like, 2. I said, then I'm not going to shallow.
Dude, it was so bad on day 2. I swear to God, it's what happened. I'm in the middle of the lake. It's a long story why I'm out there. But on day 2, I am in the middle of the lake, start tournament off in the morning. I was out there for 2.5 hours. I didn't think anything about it. Anyway, at the end of the day, I pulled up the bank, and Brian New pulls up right next to him, and he's like, Hallman, what in the world? He said, I was confused this morning, but he said, I'll tell you this. I never went to the bank because I saw you out in the middle, and I was like, I ain't going up there if he's out here.
Well, so why were you out there, Bradley? Like, what was so difficult about that shallow bite? And, like, did you have to pull the plug? Like, what did you figure out there? I know sometimes
my deal was, honestly, it doesn't have anything to do with tactics. You can actually go watch my last video that I just dropped on my YouTube. I drew the co-angler that was leading the event, and I was fishing dirt, and I struggled to catch 10 pounds, 10 pounds each day. Like John said, I had 2 bites a day each day in practice. And so I just decided to go where I hadn't even been in practice or anything. And I just stayed at the very north end where the tournament was going out of. And I just maximized my time, and I was betting on the come because every day the weather was warming and warming and warming. And John and I talked about this. He even knew it. He's like, dude, my fish are going to continue to leave. How soon are they going to get to the bank? And just with my history of Florida, it's so shallow. It happens really fast. Every time I've ever left that place, I've been amazed at how fast it comes on. And so I bet on that. And plus it's my strength and my wheelhouse. But anyway, it wasn't working, and it didn't work the first day. And I drew the Congress leading, and not only was he leading, he was from that lake, St. Cloud, right there, local. And we're allowed to share information in tournaments and the opens, the way that works out with co-anglers. and it was just really slim pickings behind me. And he had such a big lead. I knew that it wouldn't take much potentially, right? I mean, barring somebody goes out and crushes a bag like he did the first day. The dude had like 13 and a half pounds with 3 fish.
Wow.
They only have a 3 fish limit. So, I mean, he was way up there. And I just told him, I said, dude, if you've got some digits on your boat, I'll give you the first couple hours of your day. And he was like, I got them. So he showed up, put them in, and that's what I was doing at Middle Lake. We were actually on some of his digits, and he did. He caught the fish and won the Derby. It put $24,000 check in his pocket and a big trophy. So great guy, great partner, but that's why I was out there. I didn't mean to go into that story, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the fish the moment patterns is to help guys fish. It is those trophies are hard to come by, and I realized that. He was in contention to do it, so I sure didn't want to cut him short with what I was sucking up on the bank with.
That was awesome. That was really great of you too. And Bradley and John are both great guys too. Again, follow them on social if you guys on YouTube, all that stuff. Great guys to watch and just great ambassadors for the sport. And one thing that's interesting, you said you got 2 bites a day flipping, and I know when I would, I haven't fished tournaments in years, but when I would do that, there's a point where you have to commit at some point in practice. You can't go do everything all day. You can't do a little bit offshore, a little bit shallow, and find potentially the right fish unless it's just going down everywhere. So did you ever have a moment in practice where you're like, I'm just going to try offshore? Or were you just committed, locked in day one that you were going to go shallow and flip?
So really, Florida technically is all shallow. I mean, even the deep water is like 9-10 foot. I mean, it's really not that deep. I mean, you can get in some ditches in some of the river channel canals that are 15, but for the most part, I mean, 7 foot's deep in Florida. What's happened to me in the past, and this is what I've learned. So we're there in the springtime, so the spawn's always going on. Florida's a big spawn place, and a few years ago, I got caught up in some dock talk with my roommates, and it was firing up on Lake Griffin on a different chain, on the Harris chain, which is where the Elite Series is at this coming weekend. But I got up there, and man, it was easy. And it's all out in the middle of the lake. Like I say, it's only 7-8 foot deep, but you're out in the middle, and there's just the whole thing's hydrilla, and you got little holes and pockets and hard spots and walls and isolated patches and all these things that we think are the sweet spot. And it was easy out there. And all my roommates, it was easy. Like we were all going to go up there and catch 30 to 50 fish a piece a day and catch our 5 best. But what happens is then 100 guys run up there out of 200 and fight to get through the lock. You wait an hour and a half just to get through. You get up there, and then everybody spreads out over that thing. And then it's just a circle jerk. And I get the fish aren't biting, and you're looking at 20 other guys that are not getting bit around you. I mean, everybody around you can see. And I mean, like one guy catches a fish an hour, whereas, we were getting bit. And the adjustment from that to go to the bank is like calling my name, because now it's slick and it's sunny. I'm just giving examples of why I don't do that. Mm-hmm. And then I go to the bank, and then you just turn thermometer high, and all of a sudden you're practice fishing again, and you're only 3 hours into the first day of a 4 or 3 day event. No. So I enjoy doing it. I know, and I feel like I understand it, but I don't know how sometimes to make I have too much of a gut instinct to go to the bank. And it's not just flipping, I mean, whether it's looking at them sight fishing in the spawn, like when they pull up, that's a big deal down in Florida. You can catch them flipping, you can catch them top water, you can catch them frogging, you can catch them swimming a worm. I mean, there's a bazillion ways, chatterbaiting, and all those ways work, and they win tournaments there. And it's always visual targets, which, being from Oklahoma, I like visual. And what I mean by visual is like something I can see with my own 2 eyes, whether it's a dock or a rock or a stump or a laydown. Florida has way too many, honestly, visual targets. That's the problem. That's what makes it hard for everybody. But I enjoy that, and I feel like I know how to read that water. And if it doesn't work, I feel like I know what the adjustment is quicker than I know what the adjustment is when I'm out there. And I'm just not happy. Because at the end of the day, I'm sitting out there with, 10-pound test line and a jerk bait in my hand, which I'm perfectly fine with in the pre-spawn in the Ozarks, because that's how I catch big ones. But it's not how I historically catch big ones in Florida. I want, 65-pound braid, big rod, big weight. That's just how I feel, and I feel like I adjust quicker. So really, to answer the question, what it all boils down to is I really just try to stick to my strengths, because we've got such a short amount of time. to practice to find fish in such a large body of water, I try to stick to my strengths. And if I stick to my strengths, it tends to lend me a better chance at doing better in an event.
That makes sense. We'll switch over to John, who was fishing jerkbait on 10-pound test and hammering them. Give us a rundown, John, of how your practice went and maybe how you were able to avoid the temptation of the shallow water. If you were, what was your plan going to practice?
Well, I had an advantage in that I'd never been to the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes ever before. And so I didn't know it was an advantage. It actually makes you feel like it's a handicap when you first go down there because of the overwhelming amount of targets when you first launch the boat. But what I mean by that is, the night before I actually pulled up, I think I pulled up on a Sunday. So we had Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So I had 3 full days and then a partial day Wednesday to practice. So about 3.25 days of practice. And the night that I pulled up, they had all these winter alarm. My phone was literally going off, like warning me about the freezing weather. It was like below, because in Florida, they're not used to 32-degree weather. And it's having these warnings. And they were talking about iguanas falling out of trees and freezing and falling out of trees. I made a couple of goofy posts, but that was just like news articles that I was posting. And so my point being is that the people and the fish aren't used to the cold down in Florida. And so I kind of knew that it was going to be colder than usual, but I didn't really know how that was going to affect the fish until day one of practice. I put the boat in and my water temperature said 49 degrees on the boat. And when I saw that, my gut instinct was, how do these fish winter? How are these fish going to react a little bit different? And then there was another factor that had gone on that I heard a rumor about, and I had heard rumor that below Toho that the lake was down like I had heard 3 feet low. I don't think it was a 3 feet low, but it was a solid 2 foot low. For sure. And so I started thinking about that before I even started casting. And I started just in my mind trying to put myself, okay, let's forget that we're in Florida. Let's just think that I'm in Oklahoma. How would this affect the fish? And I thought that, well, it's going to affect it 2 ways. They're going to bundle up in cover, okay, or they're going to go to the most vertical, deepest spots they can find. That's just how fish behave. And so I went ahead and went straight to the bank first day of practice, and I got the patrol motor on high, and I'm cruising around, and I'm looking, and I'm pushing through stuff, and I find some beds without fish on it. I actually saw some fry. So, there'd already been some of that spawning activity going on. But, I didn't spook a fish. There was nothing. So I actually broke out the stick on high, and I kind of punched around in some stuff and taste tested really sloppily, okay? I admittedly say it wasn't Florida style fishing, but I thought to myself, you know what? The only way I'm going to be up here if it gets is stupid easy. And right now, I don't even think it's the right thing to do to be practicing the shallow. So I went ahead and looked at it, and that's where I started. And I immediately eliminated that fact that they're not there. All right. And so then I'm like, okay, they're going to be in the thickest of all covers. Well, you look up and you've never been there before. You don't know from the 10 different kinds of grasses and the different bottom composition. And then by the way, like there's 5 or 6 different lakes that I'd never been to. I didn't know it would just take hours. Even if you knew where you were supposed to be at, it could literally take you 4 hours in a football field size area to actually find out where they're balled at and sitting at, if you can get them to bite. And so I just looked at the time frame that I had, and I decided, you know what? They're going to be bundled in this stuff. These fish that just spawned are the ones that are coming in. They're going to be in it, but I don't think I can get them to go. And so I say this all the time. It's not who finds the most fish, but it's who finds the most catchable fish. And so I wanted to find the most catchable fish for me. And so I immediately started thinking, okay, I'm going to practice to try to get a top 10. So I ran every lake there was. I ran into every lake that I could get into. There's one, like a Rosalie lake. I couldn't get into it. If you can, I thought I was getting stuck so I didn't get into there. But I saw every lake there was. And so there was a lot of lakes that I just actually ran through, blew through. In 3 days of looking, you're not doing very much casting. You're doing a lot more graphing. And I got to some deeper grass at Hydrola that's offshore that, a lot of people are fishing. And I started fishing it in practice. And to be honest with you, it's still very uncomfortable. It's just a wall of grass for miles and miles and miles long. And, you could spend some time, and I know this, like I've done it before. I can go out there and drop pins on all the points and get the cuts and get the solid walls. But once again, with 3.5 days of practice, and now I'm down to my last hour of my first day, that could take you a whole day of just graphing to just find the waypoints you need to then go try to catch a fish. And I honestly, I couldn't, I was utilizing my live scope and my side imaging when I was graphing. I couldn't see fish. The fish that I saw weren't very active. And so the thing that triggered in my mind, and this was just for this event, and this fell into my lap, by the way, this top 10 finish that I had, it fell into my lap because of this cold front and because of this water dropping. And I mean, I was 2 days away from not getting a top 10. You know what I mean? It just perfect timing for us. I might have blown the tournament away if they would have actually had the tournament on practice time because I was catching some giants. But
I agree with that. I do think you do. I think that you win the Derby if it's 2 days sooner.
Yeah. So there was this window, right? And so what I did, Johnny, is I decided to get away from the grass. I went everywhere I could on all of those lakes and got away from grass. And because I figured there was fish in those same areas. And so if you kind of look at these banks as if it's kind of like an Oklahoma pond or an Arkansas pond, right? Those fish in the winter, they just kind of pull out and they sit in the belly. I mean, we've all caught fish right out in the middle. My daughter will take care of the lights for me, guys. I'm sorry. So they'll just kind of sit out in the middle and they'll wait till it warms up and then they'll come up and they'll sun themselves. And then when they get their eggs warm, when they start filling what they need to fill, then they move in. And so I went and I started finding some deeper holes. When I say deeper holes, the hole is not a very good word, okay? It's really a depression of just where it settles like this. And I started setting the boat in those areas, and I'd scan around with my electronics, not my live scope, but my side imaging to find out if there's hydrilla patches or eel grass or anything. And I was trying to not find it. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to find areas with void of cover right in front of a really good spawning area where that cold would have pushed those fish out. And they'd be sitting there, and I'd set the boat down, and I'd put the trolling motor down, and I mean, it was stupid. I could catch 20 fish in an hour if I wanted to. And then, we have conversations like I talk to Bradley. I don't talk to very many fishermen. I talk to Bradley. I talk to Jared Miller, who's my roommate, and I talk to Matt Painwright. Those are the three guys that I've, visit with. And listen, man, you also know by the frequency of phone calls from other people, right? Like it's struggle bus. Everybody's struggling. And I'm like, they're like, it's tough, it's difficult. And I'm like, it's not that difficult, and so then I realized, okay, hey, I'm on to something, right? So at the end of day one, I decided to push it a little bit. Let's see, Monday, Tuesday. So I'd say probably it was Monday when I decided to push that pattern a little bit harder and start looking more into kind of the canals and into the river systems and into that stuff. And I ran a lot of them. A lot of them were void, naked, like nothing. And then I kind of started patterning how the fish were sitting in those. A lot of it was current oriented. And then I started figuring out how, the shell beds were kind of set up and where they were set up at. The fish weren't necessarily on the shell beds. They would just be in a general area, if that makes sense. And I ended up catching, I shook off about a 9 at the side of the boat. It might have been a 10, a big one. And then I caught a 7 and a 5 on that day. On that practice day with a bunch of keepers. When I say keepers, the 12 to 14 inches, just a bunch. And day 2, I decided to do a little bit of, I say day 2. Day 2 of fishing, which is actually day 3 of practice. I decided to do a little bit of the same thing, but I went ahead and throughout the time in practice, I would go up and I would taste test. I would catch a fish, and then I'd go say, okay, I got some fish found here. And then I'd go up shallow and I'd taste test. And I'd swim a jig, I'd swim a worm, I'd swim a chatterbait. And it just wasn't easy. I wouldn't get bit. I caught probably 2 or 3 fish up shallow per day, but I'm telling you, they were not easy bites. They were the kind of bites that you're like, that's random. I don't even know how to repeat that. And so to me, my confidence level was, I don't know that I can catch 5 up shallow. Plus tournament day, there's going to be so many more people hitting this. I want to put myself in the position where in these multi-day tournaments where I'm around the most amount of fish possible. And I used to think that there was something special that you had to do to catch big fish. And there is some things, okay? But more than not, in the last few years as I've done better at catching bigger fish in the tournament, I found that if you just put yourself around a ton of fish, there's big ones there, and you just have to kind of go through them. There may be a little bit of behavioral differences, like if there's a school of fish, 3s and 4s and 2s, they may all be all up here, and the big one may be off to the side 50 feet or something. But in general, the general area or patterns that you're doing, if you're catching when I say a bunch of fish, I'm talking about where you're catching 20 or 30 fish a day, you're going to run into a couple good ones. And so that happened in practice to me. I had all these little bitty fish, and then I had these giants every day, a couple giants every day. And so that's what I did, man. Tournament day came around, and I said, you know what? I'm going to put the blinders onto the bank on day one. I may come in and be in 50th place, 100th place, but I know I'm going to catch fish on day one. And that's just a good feeling to have, man. When you have that confidence at takeoff, you can see it in other people's eyes. They don't even know if they're going to catch a fish. And you know you're going to be laughing them because you're going to catch fish. That's awesome. So that's what it was like on day one. Is I think my first limit was 5 pounds. My second limit was 7 pounds. My third limit was 9, like little bitty fish. And I found a couple big fish holes that were holding some bigger fish where the bigger females were sitting at. And I went and spent every day, I spent 3 to 4 hours on these holes. And on the end of day one, in the last hour, they all of a sudden turn on. The Florida fish are different. The big Florida girls are way different than the northern strain fish. They don't bite, and when they don't want to bite, they won't bite. That's why all those shiner fishermen actually do catch them. Like I could sit there for 3 or 4 hours and work these big fish and not get bit, but all of a sudden, about 3 o'clock or something at the end of day one tournament, I end up catching a 5 and a 4 and a 360 something. And those three good ones are what propelled my weight on day one. So.
That's awesome. There's a lot to unpack there. That was a lot of great info there, yeah. John. Just spilling the juice. A couple comments. I want Bradley to comment on that as well here. But a couple comments I had. One is you're a man after my own heart, John. You love graphing and you love going after it. And as viewers of my live stream and stuff know, when I make my videos, I graph. If I fish for 8 hours, I'm graphing for 6 hours of those fishing days. And a lot of people ask, why do I graph so much? It's exactly what John was talking about. He is spending his time understanding where the fish are and what they're doing. I don't spend my time taste testing the shallow water because when I go fishing, I have one day to catch fish for a video. Otherwise, I don't make a video and I don't make money. So I have to go graph. But the thing that's interesting that John talked about with his graphing is he didn't just go graph all the obvious stuff with the grass and all that stuff. He looked for something that was unique and different. And Bradley, this is something I want to actually throw at you too, just a question. But like last year on Grand Lake, I only fished out there, I think, 5 times. But every single time I caught fish on Grand this past year offshore, I caught them off shell beds. 100% of the fish. And that was in the spring all the way through the fall. And a lot of guys don't know that there were shell beds out there. The only other time I caught them, I actually caught them on brim beds out in the middle of a pocket that were like in 6 foot of water. But it was, everyone on Grand knows you can catch them on brush piles, catch them on rock piles. That's what guys go fish. Or maybe there's some like main river drops, stuff like that. But that's like the main stuff. Not that many guys know how to, find shell beds or know what to look for to find those or target those, but it's finding something different. And even like last year, there was a Major League Fishing event that Jordan Lee won. It was the Big Bass tournament they had where you caught like the giant fish. They're fishing Harris Chain or Okeechobee or something. And Jordan Lee caught his fish on brush piles on a Florida lake. Everyone else was fishing grass, but he was fishing brush piles, which is a really weird deal. So that's something that's just really fascinating to me. And Bradley, what are your thoughts, one, on everything John said, but also just about finding that stuff that's maybe not as well known off the wall, like going away from the crowd completely? Do you try to do that? Do you try to fish, what everyone else is doing? What are your thoughts there? I know that's a lot of questions.
No, I know. And so let's start with the Grand one. First of all, I think that the majority and some of the very best anglers, and dude, I mean this with total sincerity because I've got blood on Grand Lake. Some of the very best anglers on Grand Lake don't even realize that they're catching them off shell beds. They call them gravel bars. They call them rock, whatever. They feel the same thing, right? They feel like a rock spot. That's what they feel like. If you don't know, you know the difference because you've spent so much time idling that you're seeing it instantly on your side image. Mm-hmm. Those guys have just fished it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And most of those, like where you're talking about, like the only place that you really got bit was on those bars that had the mussel shells on them. Those are always sitting in current related positions, right?
Yep.
So like on a reservoir that's not a true river system, they'll gather up where the current hits the most because there's really not that much current there, just whenever they turn on the water and generate. So that's where they tend to get. So that's where the most current congregates. That's why they're there, but it also in turn is why the fish are there, right? So it's kind of like the ecosystem of life. Man, you know, like what I said in the beginning, we all three agree on one thing. We're saying it different ways. And John's saying some things there about, you know, why he chose this and that and the other. It still is his strength. I mean, at the end of the day, dude, I can't emphasize how good he is at live scope. Like, I'll say this, I am really, 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 really good at it. And when I get in the boat with him, he is on another planet. And I don't mean that just a little bit. I mean that truthfully and heartfully. And he fishes that. He searches for that. He finds that. That's his comfort zone. And the weather was perfect for it, just like he said. I'll tell you how much faith I have in what he's doing with it. I don't even talk to people. I know I've been around enough that when I'm throwing chatterbait, flipping, and all the stuff in Florida, and the water's 45 degrees, I know before I go out in the morning. You'd be lucky, you know, if you get a couple bites, and most of them will be in the afternoon with the later part of the day. And so I'm honestly using my eyes because I'm looking for signs of life that was there before the cold front, right? Because the cold front came right before we came. It was warm before that, and they were spawning. And so that's really how I'm practicing. I'm practicing on, okay, it was warm. They were doing their deal. Now it's gotten cold. They've stopped. But see, our tournament forecast was every day was 70, 75. Our tournament days were 80, 85, and like 86 or something. That was the 3 tournament days. And like I said, I know Florida comes fast. And John, you know, lands there, and it's cold. And so he really, honestly, is just going straight to his strength, just like what you're talking about with some of the things that you're doing with idling and live scoping, or not live scoping, but side imaging and using your electronics. 100% you're going to your strength. And when I say when I'm going to the bank, I'm not being stupid about it. Like, I'm still looking at the weather forecast projected throughout the week. And John will agree. The tournament was won the way that I'm practicing.
Yeah, it was.
And the guy that won it, and here's the problem. I just didn't, there's 6 lakes there to cover. And in 2.5 days, I didn't find, and I don't even know that I make the call that the guy makes, but I know exactly what he was looking at because I found it in the north end of Kissimmee. It was more beds than I have ever seen in one spot because the lake was low. Dude, there was 500 beds, guaranteed, in a quarter-mile stretch, maybe smaller than that, 500 empty beds. And there's nobody on them. They're not home. And I went and checked them the last day of practice because we had to be off the water at noon. There still was nobody home. I've got to go through a lock with 125 other boats. It only fits like 15 boats, right? I mean, you have to put all this stuff through the thought process, and they're not here. Why are they going to be here tomorrow morning? You know, because I'd found them 2 days earlier. So I wasn't willing to bet on that.
Yeah.
And the guy that wins the Derby, he bets on that. Now, it wasn't at the North End Kissimmee. He found them on Cypress, a different lake. But it was the same thing. He saw all those beds. I knew it would go down with a chatterbait or a swim jig because they're not going to come in. When they do come, they're not just going to go, bam, lock on a bed. It's going to be staging, just like fish stage. They're going to come in. But, you know, they're going to be on that outside edge first, and then they're going to come in, you know, closer to the grass. It was around where the spawn areas were, and I knew that's where it would go down, and I knew it would be on some type of reaction bait, probably a chatterbait or a swim jig or a rattle trap, which is always a big deal. I mean, it's like 3 baits in Florida. It's not complicated. It's only 2 foot deep.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. And the winner stands on stage, and he says, dude, there was so many beds, I knew they had to come, and they did. Mm-hmm. Me fishing for the entire year, trying to qualify for the Elite Series is my main goal, and we got 9 tournaments in front of us. I couldn't bet on making that lock to go down to that place in Kissimmee and bet they come. And they did come. Now, they didn't come like they came in Cypress, but they came. I talked to people that were down there on the north end of Kissimmee in that spot, and they were like, dude, there was 20 and 30 fish being caught by each person by Friday afternoon. But, I mean, how do you make that gamble? And I couldn't do that. And also the other issue I had, so I was going to go back to John. John's calling me. Like, I know. Now, we don't call like 15 times a day. What do we talk about? Once, twice a day max?
Unless we see each other on the water.
John's calls me, and I already know. I know because I know how good he is with live scope. First day I'm there, the phone rings, and it's probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It gets dark at 5:30. And I've had 1 or 2 bites. It's been bad. And I know where he's coming. He said, you doing any good? And I said, nah, John, I've had a couple of bites. And he's like, I hadn't heard from you. And I was like, no, I just let the day get by. I said, how about you? And he's like, man, I had like 20, 25 keeper bites probably. And I'm like, good ones? You got any good ones? And he's like, yeah, dude, I got like one that's, because maybe in the day you had that one close to 10 pounds. She's like, I don't know, man. She was like 9, 10, she wasn't hooked very good. She come off right by the boat. Dude, I know just from being in the boat with him, like that's not, even as good as I am at that, I know that that's not tempting to me to go try to, one, he's my buddy. I don't want to jump on top of him because it's amazing how small a place gets when you share information with people, even a place as big as that. So he's giving me detailed information about what he's kind of seeing, and I've kind of got a pretty good idea where he's sitting already. Now, there's 10 miles of that or so, but I got a pretty good idea. But anyway, I know how good he is. And so, like, I can't get up there and do what he does. Plus, in my mind, early on, dude, I'm looking at the weather, and every day's going to get warmer and warmer and warmer, and I'm going to be just fine. So, hey, maybe we meet up in the top 10. And I bet on that come. And like I say, I bet on it all the way through practice. And by the end of it, it hadn't come for me. And then I had to make that choice to sit. But, dude, I think we all three agree what we're doing is we're all, if the weather and the seasonal patterns will allow, we're going to use our strengths to that.
Yeah, and I'll throw something in there also, Johnny. Like, I had 15 pounds on day 1, 15 on day 2, and then day 3, which is the top 10 day where they cut it to the top 10. Those boys that did exactly what Bradley did, their weight started jumping, and I had a good idea that I needed to bail on what I was doing, and I really did think I could still get 12 pounds or something like that, and I was kind of playing the points game, and so I stuck with doing what I was doing, and I think I only came in. I don't have to look back. I don't remember if I had 8 pounds. It was really light, like a really light limit on day 3, but hindsight's 2020. We do this tournament again next year, the same things line up. I'm going to tell you, I saw some things in practice by just driving around that I knew exactly where those guys were catching. Like my mind even told Bradley, hey man, this right here looks like the best. And I never went and practiced it because I didn't have time, And so next time day 3 comes around, the jerk bait and the 12-pound test line, it's going in the box and the big stick's coming out. And I'm going to go.
It happens so fast down there, guys. I can't explain. So, like Johnny, you spend a lot of time there in Arkansas, and the river, for example, goes quicker than the Ozark Lakes do in Arkansas, right? Yep. Dude, I am telling you, it is amazing what 49-degree water is. What John said. I mean, it was 65 time we got done.
Oh yeah,
yep.
It was, and it was colder on day 3, and it was still warmer.
I'm thinking like Spadra on Lake Dardanelle. I mean, I grew up fishing Lake Dardanelle. I mean, it's probably
a great example.
It's probably not as drastic, but like one day you're catching them out of ditches on a trap in 5, 6 foot of water, and then the next day they're up against the reeds spawning. 2 days later.
And the reason why is same thing with Florida. Spadra is this, for you guys that don't know, which Johnny knows that place a whole lot better than I do, but Spadra is a giant backwater, but the majority of it, I would say if you just did mathematics on it, it's 90% flats, maybe 80%
2
flat.
foot deep.
Like 2 foot deep all the way across, and it's a big body of water, and then the 20% is just the ditch. And so it doesn't take much sunlight when the sun's at the right angle to heat that thing back up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing that, so actually I have a bunch of, man, you guys are great. We need to have both you guys on again because I have so many questions, but I do have to talk about one thing really quick before we jump into these other questions because it's going to send us down another rabbit hole. But really quick, I want to, actually I'm going to do this. Let me pull up the screen over here and I'm going to start sharing my screen with you guys so you can actually see this too because I want to get your opinion on this. Because I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but this is actually a new app that I'm releasing that, let's see here. Oh,
Dude, I've been wondering what this was. Like I talked to you a while ago, like months ago, and I knew you had something working. I've been wondering what it was. And then I heard through the grapevine, through some people, what it was. And I was like, dude, this is so cool.
Yeah, so basically what it is called the Deep Dive app. And what I did is work with a team of guys, and I pulled tournament data from every single tournament you could ever imagine out there to get actual tournament strategies on lakes all across the country. So you're talking about the FLW Tour, Old FLW Bassmaster, all the way back, as long as you can get tournament data for. The Costas, the Everstarts, whatever tournament data I could find. I remember a lot of stuff because I pulled out old Bassmaster magazines. I mean, I'm going crazy here, like not from the 90s, trying to get as much tournament information as I can. And then what I did is cross-reference that with real-time weather and real-time, ideas on bass behavior, how bass behave in these different areas through research and things like that. And what this app does, it takes all the information and it recommends the top strategies to use, both shallow and offshore, based on the current weather conditions and a few inputs. You have your stained water, dirty water, clear water, so you have your water clarity, your water temperature, whether you want to fish in a protected area or a wind-blown area, and if there's vegetation, if you have grass in your area or not. If you take those 4 inputs, put them in, we're pulling lake level, we're pulling all these characteristics on these lakes, the current flow, frontal conditions, all this stuff, and calculating with data which patterns are going to be the best on any lake that you select. You can actually go in the app right now. We have 1,300 lakes available in the app. And you can actually request them and get more added. And the great thing about this app is it doesn't just give you like a bait recommendation. It also gives you where to fish. It gives you examples of contour line maps, where to go, deep or shallow. You have your drone images of different types of structure and cover. And we also give sonar images of what does a shell bed look like? What does a rock pile or brush pile look like? All this information is in the app. And guys, it is scary good how good this app is, because I'm pulling all this data, and it's basically just this big data. And I used to do demand forecasting and big data for DiGiorno pizza. So I'd forecast pizza for Nestle. So I had to take all this data from Walmart and figure out when is someone going to buy a pizza around the Super Bowl or around when it gets cold up in Wisconsin. There's certain seasons where DiGiorno pizza is better or not. And I used all that skill I had to do that for fishing. And the recommendations in this thing are scary good. Like, it's to the point where when you update this and you use it, it's like, I wouldn't even thought to do that because I wouldn't think that the fish were there yet. Like, the weather or the wind or whatever it is, it shouldn't be there yet. But then you pull in there and it's like, hey, it's working. Or it's just information that maybe I didn't have because I collected all the data, but it's hard to think about all these factors at once. Is the water warming, or is the sun coming in, or is the wind, and all this stuff. It's so hard to keep all these factors straight in your head, and this app will do that. It's obviously not foolproof. It's like not perfect, or it's going to get you on the winning bag of fish for every tournament, but it gives you a great starting point of strategies that are going to be working based on historical data from tournaments. And that's really what I want to try to do with this app, is take a lot of that information that's out there, compile it, and help people literally fish the moment. This is going to help you fish the moment if you pay attention to what's happening in this app. So that is the Deep Dive app, guys. You can actually go to our website, deepdiveapp.com. You can download it for iPhone or for Android, and definitely check it out if you haven't already. It's free to download. You can get one strategy in there for free. You can also see all the lake lists and everything like that. So check it out, deepdiveapp.com, or just type Deep Dive into the Apple App Store, Google Play Store. So that's all. I got to throw that out there real quick. What do y'all think on that?
Dude, I think it's awesome. Like I said, I was wondering, like you and I were talking. I mean, it's been months, maybe a year ago, and you were talking about this app idea you had, and like, everything in fishing, you kind of keep down on the down low because you want to keep your stuff tight to the vest. And I've been wondering, and then like just a few weeks ago, I heard, I was like, hey man, he's launching this thing, and I was like, what is it? What is it? And then they started telling me, and I was like, dang it, man, I knew he had a good idea.
For sure. It's been pretty cool, and we're working on a lot of awesome new features all the time, guys. We're grinding on this thing. We're also trying to make YouTube videos and do all the other stuff. But question over here is, do we have any Pennsylvania lakes? Yeah, we got lakes for every state you could think of. There's 1,300 lakes, and if we don't have it, you can request it, and we'll get it added here within like 3 or 4 days. So definitely let us know, and we'll be able to get that in. So that is Deep Dive, but let's talk a little bit more about all this tournament stuff. So, okay, a couple things. One, John, I always ask you this every time we talk because I always am interested. I like live scope, but like I feel very confident in my ability to side imaging, down imaging. That's like where my number one strength is. I feel like I can find anything out on the middle of the lake with side imaging, down imaging. How important was side imaging to your success in this tournament versus live scope? And I know it probably is going to be like, it was more important in practice than live scope was more important in the tournament, but like, if you had to rate it on your success, like how much of your success was because of side imaging, how much was because of live scope, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it was 99 live scope, 99% live scope.
I was wondering now. I was like, I know the number in my head. I'm thinking, but I'm like, I wonder how honest he's going to answer this one.
Yeah, but I will say it's very interesting because it's Florida, right? You're graphing a mud hole. I mean, basically, and because my Express has got it's aluminum boat, so my transducer, I don't have an in hole like fiberglass boats do. So I basically got to run in. So I did a lot of running into areas and just setting the boat down, and I kind of figured out that if I was within about 150 yards of the bank and I was sitting in about 8 to 5 foot, that there was a good chance that those fish had pulled right there. And there's not very many of those spots. So when you consider, hey, I want to be close to a spawning area. So I would go to a lot of those. I would go to a new lake. When I say new lake, there was 5 or 6 different lakes in the chain, and I'd run. And then the other thing is, I want to say, I knew there was going to be an extremely heavy south wind for the first 2 days of the tournament. So I intentionally did not look at anything on the North Shore. And that's where everybody's looking for spawners. So I found a lot of good stuff away from everybody else because no one was looking for that south bank. And I was actually looking for these little nooks and stuff in the south bank where if I found fish, I wouldn't be blown off from the fish on tournament day. So I would run to those south banks and areas, and I'd say, okay, I can see they're going to spawn there. I mean, basically, it's like, in your mind, it's like, if I'm going to throw a Cinco, where is it going to be? Okay, I see there's the Cinco's hole. And then I would land my boat about 150 yards from it. And if I was in 2 foot of water, I would leave. Because I felt like those fish, were still out behind me, and then they were scattered. And then you'd start getting into a lot of gar and stuff like that. So I did a lot of that in Florida. If it was a harder bottom, I wouldn't be able to have done that if we weren't in Florida. So I was running into areas and just setting the boat down real quick and just saying, okay, here's the temperature, here's the depth, looking around, it's not deep enough, go. And so I just hop. And when I found that 5 to 8 foot depth, then I'd put the trolling motor down and I'd put the live scope down and I'd scan around and practice and I'd look. And if I saw trash fish, a lot of big gar, I'd get out of there. I didn't like messing around. The gar would scare the bass away. So that's kind of how my practice was.
Yep.
For the most part.
He's not given a lot of the other information that's very vital to that. So that was a really good political answer there, John.
Johnny, let me tell you the part that really matters. The part that he did say is where he's like, I'm scanning around, there was a gar and there's some sand bass and just junk trash fish. Dude, that's what the rest of us are like making 2 or 3 casts at and like trying to catch. And he literally just like gets a glimpse and he's like, nope, let's go. And we're all like, well, is she following my...
Yeah, she's following.
Oh, it's a crappie. We catch it. He's been gone for an hour and a half.
Do you know what's great though? This is one thing I always talk to John about too, is because if you understand how sonar images kind of work, like I'm really good at differentiating species of fish on down imaging and side scan. It's so much easier for me. Like I feel like when I put live scope in the water, it's 10 times easier for me to understand it because I'm like, like John says, I can tell a gar and a white bass and it's, to me, it's like plain as day. Like, but it's hard for me to explain that in videos and stuff like that too, because it's a lot of instinct. And I think that part of it is
I do agree with you. So like, I'm old enough that I'm probably as old as both of y'all put together. The
62%.
The old 2D. So like when I first started learning how to drop shot, God, we were at Table Rock and it was an elite series. This is like 2006 or something. We had to set the grass up a certain way. That's all we had anyway. Wes Endicott was a good friend of mine. And Wes Endicott's a really, really, really good fisherman up in Missouri. And he had it down to a pat.
Yep.
And I fished the tournament, got a check, got out of there. But I never scared him. And Wes was like, dude, you were right on top of him. So, like, we go back out later. And he could tell that. I'm like, how do you tell the difference? Like, a lot of those trees and stuff that we were dropping on the 2D, like what you're talking about, Johnny.
Yep.
Had a lot of brim and different things. And I'm like, how do you tell? And he's like, dude, it's that bottom line. He's like, I don't pay as much attention to the back of the fish. He paid attention to the bottom of the fish. And it's just more jagged and rough, whereas if it was a bass, it was much more straight, seemed more like the back line looks,
Mm-hmm.
But I agree, you can take that same thing, even though the forward-facing sonar is a different technology. They still kind of have that harder seam line. Does that make sense? I know John and I talked about this. He's like, yeah, the gar will be a little bit rough too.
It makes so much sense. And one thing that, John, I don't want you to have to spill all of your guts out here, so I will.
No, we're good.
To throw this, but I'm working on a video right now, and I wanted to show this this example image because I was graphing out on local power plant lake, and you guys who know that area, you probably know what I'm talking about. But I wanted to show this image because it's pretty. It drives this point home really well, and I'm trying to find it here on the fly. It's basically, here we go. Okay, so let me share my screen here, and I'm going to share on my end so you guys can see this again. This is something that, for me, has always been really important. I kind of want to show you guys an example of this, because I always like to show examples on the stream, guys, because it's hard enough when you're doing this, but let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah.
So basically what I got here is some standing timber. And with the standing timber, you can see the tree right here. And I'm trying to look for 5-pounders. Like, when I'm graphing, I don't want to mess around and see a 2-pounder or a 3-pounder. Like, I want to see a good fish. And based on how these fish are positioned on the screen, I could tell they're bass based on how they're spread apart, the way they're stacked up on top of each other. I have videos explaining this. But I use 2D inside imaging, or 2D and down imaging on this tree, where you can see this tree isn't even showing up on my 2D sonar. And I do that on purpose because I want those trees to literally disappear. And that comes down to settings on your fish finder. And you can see this arch right here has a really bright spot in the center, and that's that dot right there. There's other dots in this image. These are little fish. This is like a 5 or 6 pounder. And I caught a 5 and I broke off a 7 on this exact set of trees, like right here. And this is the deal, that it comes down to not only just your ability to decipher are these bass or not, but are the bass you're looking at the right size even. And that's something that John can do with the live scope, that he can look at a fish and say that's a 5 versus that's a 7 versus that's a 2-pounder. And you can also see on the bottom of the lake here, like, are there fish hiding on the bottom of the lake, or are these just rocks and stick-ups and things like that? And that's stuff that I can do as well with my 2D sonar side imaging, down imaging. I can do it with the live scope as well, but that's just an example of what we're talking about. Is it's not just a lot of times the knowing how to interpret the picture, it's getting the right settings up and getting the settings that work to your eye and what you know. Because John might use these settings and say, these settings are crazy. I actually was out with the guys from Lawrence, and I showed them these settings, and I sent them my settings I used for my fish finder because they were curious, and all the engineers said my settings sucked. They said, don't share those settings with anyone because your settings are terrible, they don't work,
Really?
And there's no way you should ever use those settings. You're completely wrong. We need to get in the boat with you. I go out in the boat with them, and I graph around with them for an hour, and they're like, oh my God, I know why you use your settings like this. This makes perfect sense. And like, they were giving me so much crap. They're like, your settings are terrible. You don't know what you're talking about. And by the time they're done, they're like, you need to tell our engineers like about this. So like, that's the thing that is crazy. But I don't mean to get off on that tangent, but I just wanted to give that example for guys who are curious. And any comments on that? Sorry, that was a big tangent.
Yeah, I think that most generally speaking, and I feel like I can, I have some experience backing what I'm about to say. Most generally speaking, the settings that you're supposed to use to be able to actually find and catch fish, people don't like. They don't like to hear the truth. They want to say, hey, how do you get the clearest screen? I saw so-and-so's, when they don't understand. So when you take a picture or a video of a screen, it clears it up. Yep. And I've even gotten a picture with people in the boat, and I've set the settings right, and they're like, oh, that's too grainy, that's too... And I'm like, now take your phone out and take a picture of it. And they do it, and I'm like, it's not. See, it looks clean, right? Like, so for the most part, you want to see way more than what other people are wanting to see. And so, to be honest with you, most of the forums now, Jonny, this is with your exception, man, because I know you go way in depth. Most of the forums, I quit even listening to. I try to help and give feedback and stuff. And people don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear what they want to hear. They want to do what looks good to them. They want this perfect looking screen. And it actually filters out the fish, or it filters out the cover that you're trying to find. And most of the time, you're trying to either tune in to see the fish or the cover, or a softer or harder, structure of some kind. And you almost have to tune your settings for that feature, and it will tune out the other stuff. There's not a lot of times that you'll have settings that will show you everything. You know what I mean? Not a lot. It's possible. And then those settings also, they change depending on whether it's a sunny day, a cloudy day, where there's disturbance in the water, where there's turbulence in the water, where there's thermocline. There's all sorts of stuff that factors in day by day, hour by hour to your settings.
I know you know this too, John, but like I'm changing my settings literally constantly. Like I'm always tweaking my settings nonstop. Like I don't have the same settings on my screen for more than about 10 minutes most of the time on any of my graphs. And a lot of people just want to set it, forget it. And that's such a funny. All those people who gave me bad comments on my 3 forward-facing sonar review. I reviewed Active Target, Mega Live, and Live Scope, and they said my Live Scope image sucked. Go look at John's graph. My settings I had on that video are the same ones John uses. I'm telling you, because it gives you the best image. It doesn't look pretty, but it shows you what you need to see.
I'm about catching fish. I don't care how pretty the screen looks. I want to catch fish.
Yeah, to simplify that, we like it hot. That's what he likes.
Yeah.
He likes a hot screen, and what I mean by that is it's got a lot of interference, and everybody wants this perfectly black screen with a dot and a dot and a dot.
Yep.
And that's not how you get the best picture. You get it by turning up the heat on it, and then there's a whole bunch of interference there, but still the dots still show up, but you kind of got to look through it, and then you'll find that there's another 2 or 3 dots that you're not noticing on that clear screen that John's seeing.
Yep.
And you get that by all the way back to the flasher. You get all the way back to the flasher, the 2D. You turn in your A scope right now on your 2D, and you crank that stuff up. And then all of a sudden now, not only are you seeing your bait and your weight and the fish, but now you're also seeing the line. You know what I mean? And you're seeing every single detail to what's going on. And that's when you start getting really good with that, drop shot or spoon or whatever you're doing right below the boat. We're just taking that and we're magnifying it across a different platform.
Yep, and here's an example too on that. And again, I'm not using Live Scope here, but here's an example of trees where you can see some dots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I turn my sensitivity when I'm fishing standing timber down, so I filter out the trees and keep the dots of the fish. But here's
you turn your contrast up when you're doing that.
Yeah,
contrast up, sensitivity down is what you're doing.
Sensitivity down, and it fades. Basically, what it does is it makes those bigger dots pop. And if their fish are over the top of one of those trees, you can actually see the fish in that tree. Versus when I could graph through on Table Rock a field of standing timber, and I can pick out every single fish in that entire field of timber with these settings if it's over a certain size. At some point, these fish are going to get faded out, but I don't care. I don't care if I'm losing 2-pound spotted bass. I'm looking for a 5-pound largemouth in a tree. So that's what I do. But you can crank the sensitivity up. Here's the same image.
That's dirty, dude.
I know.
I want to go do that with you. That's dirty.
Well,
dude, there's a lot of trees up there, and I would like to be able to just idle and go, okay,
dude,
these two right there got big ones. And then we'd get John up there on the live scope and turn around on them and drop.
Dude, I love that. Like, I grew up in Ouachita, so that's what we learned to do.
Yeah.
But if you look at this, see all these fish, you can see a million fish in these trees. But the tree is right there. So if that fish right here is on top of that tree, you'll never see the fish. You'll just see the blob because the fish doesn't pop.
How are you setting it? Tell me this again. Say it again. You got the contrast turned.
So it's on the Lowrance, it's tricky because I don't normally use a Lowrance. I actually use a Humminbird for this because on Humminbird, what you do is you crank down the sensitivity, crank up the contrast, and you also have to change the sharpness setting on a Humminbird, and you also have to change. There's a few other little key things you can change in the actual frequencies you're using to get this image right. So it's a bunch of modifications.
You're turning your frequency down.
Yeah. And then if you take the Lowrance, there's not as many options to adjust it. So I couldn't filter. Ideally, I wouldn't even want to see half these fish. I want those trees to pretty much be gone and just see these big dots. But that's where I use 2D. Because this is that same image. Boom, there's a big one. There's a decent one. There's a decent one right there. I'm only seeing this fish, and this fish. I'm filtering all the little ones.
Yeah. Which gets rid of a lot of the trash fish, right?
Correct.
It includes some trash fish too, with carp and gar, but for the most part, we're getting rid of all the crappie and brim, which there's more of them than anything.
Exactly. And in here, I can tell these are bass, one, by the size of them, but two, if you're dealing with a bunch of gar will stack up more than 4 high, and they'll get really tight and packed in, where these fish are spread really far across the screen. There's a bunch of distance between them. They're stacked no more than 3 high. Those are some of the factors you can look at. So like to me, boom, this is bass. But I can also graph trees and be like, oh, there's gar, there's white bass, there's striper. Striper will set up really weird on the graph. So when you're on like Beaver Lake, for example, I'll go graph beaver. 2/3 the fish you find out there in the trees are striper. So you have to ignore them and find your largemouth if you want to do that.
Very interesting.
So that's
yeah, and we're still, there's still that time where we get fooled. It's not like every single time.
Oh yeah.
But the more you get it right, then the more times 90% of the time I'm throwing at the right fish, or you're stopping on the right fish, and that's when it gets really, really productive.
Yep. Well, and then there's the challenges of this is just standing timber, but what about when you're fishing grass? Well, like I can go graph, again, fishing Washita, I can graph grass and I can see fish in the shadow of a wall of grass and see which chunks are a hole in the grass. I can see fish in the holes of the grass. Like there's so many, not all takes different settings. Or finding fish on a smooth bottom versus a rocky bottom. You can find fish with all this stuff if you graph enough and you figure it out. It's just not easy. It's freaking hard. But I mean, I've put, John, I on my boat, I almost have like 1,500 hours on my poor little 150.
All idle hours.
All idle hours on my engine.
Wow.
So my engine's pretty beat up right now. But yeah, so that's the deal there. But one question I have for you, and that was a big tangent. Apologize.
Dude, that was a very good tangent.
But so anyway, so question for you, Bradley, on your tournament. This is just, and I'm not like questioning your decisions or anything. I'm just curious. You found those fish on the north end of Kissimmee. So you know that from a tournament perspective or a time perspective, you don't have time to run multiple lakes in a day. If you found those fish, though, and you thought, well, I look at the weather's going to get nicer, potentially those fish are going to move in, maybe you tried this. I guess my first thought would be, okay, maybe I should try to find some fish that are off the bank or doing something different in Kissimmee to give myself the option to go check those fish every day in case they pull in. And maybe you could spend 6 hours fishing something else in Kissimmee. And I know that that's easier said than done because you have to go find something instead of trying to check all the rest of the lakes. What's your thought on that approach, or does that just not work in these opens? I don't really know.
No, you're spot on. So that's exactly what I did. So I went out to the beds, and I found them, and then they weren't, obviously they weren't there. And I moved the grass right outside of that. They weren't there. And then I flipped. And generally speaking, too, this is a big deal in Florida, and I knew this. A lot of times when it gets cold in Florida, like it did instantly with cold front, those fish will suck up in the mats, what few mats are around. This year was different with that chain of lakes. There's usually not that many mats on Toho. But this time there was a lot, and probably too many. But anyway, generally speaking, mats is a really, really, really good thing in cold fronts because those fish don't want to swim out there 4 or 5 miles after they were just on the bed. They'll just go to the first thing they get under, and a mat works just like a blanket. It's like what they put over your hot tub. You know how you cover a hot tub? All hot tubs got a cover on it to keep the heat in. It basically works the same way, and those fish will swim right underneath it. And so punching becomes a big deal in cold fronts. But like John said, he said he went hopping around and tried a bunch of it kind of half-heartedly, but he still didn't get any bites. I went full in on it, tried it, didn't get any bites. So anyway, I did that. So I started the grass, mats, the outside edge of the grass, and then I moved even out past that. So the outside Kissimmee grass line, which is what they call a natural grass line there. On Kissimmee, there's not a lot of offshore hydrilla. Most of it's inside the Kissimmee grass line. So I move out there, and actually what happens when I move out there is I think, okay, great. Now I've got what John's got. I don't have any grass. I don't have anything. I've just got a mud bottom. And I'm right outside of these spawning areas, and I went to 3 of them predominantly where I knew there was a lot of beds inside of, and I spent probably an hour, hour and a half at each one of them, live scoping, side imaging, down imaging, just where I could try to find harder bottoms, a little depression like what John was talking about. I was just trying to find something. Find a lot of that stuff. I did. I found little depressions, stuff where they pool, and there was a group of fish there. But guess what? There's a lot of other fish there that aren't bass. There was a lot. There was a lot of crappie. And it was just. some of the upper lakes, like where John was fishing. It's got more hydrilla offshore, which clears the water and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it tends to make that bite more. John knows what I'm talking about. When you start getting that watercolor and you get some of that, it tends to make everybody want to stay shallower with that much cover. They don't pull as far out. And I think that those fish, I mean, I felt like this the whole time. They didn't pull. All of them didn't pull out there like they do in some of the clearer parts of that system. Some of the clearer parts of the system, they stay out there. They don't even come to the bank. But does that make sense? So, yes, I went through all those same scenarios you're talking about. It just didn't. It wouldn't work out there, but I definitely tried it 110%. I mean, tried it hard. Like I went through that process of where are they going to be out here, and I just couldn't put it together. Actually, John told me of one place on Kissimmee that he had pulled out in front of, and it's a premier spawning area, and he did catch a couple fish out there. He told me.
Yeah, I caught a couple, but like Bradley said, that water was dingier, and there in that dingier water, anywhere in Florida where there's dingier water, you would start seeing a lot more gar, a lot more crappie. And those areas were hard for me to repeat fish catches in. And so I ended up, for the pattern that I was doing, I ended up having to write Kissimmee off. Even though I knew that there were some big ones there, I had to write it off because it just didn't match. I wanted the clearest water that I could find for what I was doing.
I'm about to make you guys spill the juice. I apologize in advance. So with all of these tournaments, everything, I've going through the process of this deep dive app, I've collected. I had to collect like the certain water clarities guys are in, and like all these different factors. So like I dug a lot of data, and one thing I noticed is water clarity is probably the most overlooked factor in all of these tournament successes in terms of when guys do well. Most of the guys are grouped up in a section of the lake that has a certain water clarity, and a lot of times that water clarity is changing. So it's not just that they're in the clear water. It's like a lot of times when that water clarity is clearing up, or when it's dirtying up, or something along those factors, and those conditions are changing. And that might not be that big of a deal for a guy who's fishing a regular Tuesday nighter or like a BFL or whatever potentially. But like with the opens, I feel like a lot of times you have 3 days of practice and that water is a certain clarity, but at some point it starts to clear up or it starts to dirty up, and that gets those fish that weren't catchable, makes them catchable, and they now haven't been touched for 3 or 4 days by all these anglers. Is that true? Is that, because I've noticed that, but I don't know if that actually plays out as much as I think it does. Bradley has a point.
Well, John, I've been fishing Florida for 20 years or longer. John came down, and in his analogy, we talked about it coming home. And, dude, it's stupid. So, like, he is spot on to this question. Get it. I mean, even tell him about the part about him not using the lateral line. I think you throw it out there. Do it. I thought it was most impressive. Off the hook. You don't go read this in a magazine somewhere. This is this man's brain, and I do think he's right. I do.
So we're talking about Florida fish here, to be very specific, because I can give you a lot of examples of stuff you're talking about, even the crappie fishing that fit in with everything you're saying, but
I agree.
It doesn't necessarily match what we're about to talk about. So I had always heard in Florida, go to the clearest water, go to the clearest water, go to the clearest water, right? And so, you know, I've heard it enough, I studied enough that I believe it. But you also, as a fisherman, you kind of always have that. Well, I'm gonna challenge this theory, kind of, because you know if you can catch them in the dirty water and no one else is going there, then you got it all to yourself, right? Well, there was this little mouth of a canal, and they were dredging right there, right in the mouth of Cypress, right? And one of the practice days, I went into that mouth and it was an idle zone. And I was I kind of wanted to find some fish there because I knew people wouldn't be running by me and blowing me out. I knew they'd have to idle through. And they started schooling, and the water was clear. And I caught 4 or 5 little fish really quickly. And I'm like, hey, you know, I got me a keeper spot. You know, it was early in practice. I think on day 2, if I remember right. Yeah, on day 2. And so I'm like, hey, you know, I got some bites. Well, as the tournament went on, as we got into the tournament time period, there was a big south wind that came in. And then just up from where they were dredging at, they were pumping all that dirty water back in. Well, that whole area got completely brown, if you will. And there was a couple times I went in there and tried to fish. It wasn't the same when it was brown. I taste tested it. Nothing was good. And then the third and final day, the north wind turned, the 20-mile-an-hour north wind, And I was idling through this area, and I looked down, and it was literally the clearest water I'd seen all over the whole entire chain. It went from the dirtiest water to the clearest water in overnight. And I'd never seen that before anywhere. And so I stopped the boat immediately. My camera or my marshal's with me. Like, I jumped up. I get all excited because I'm like, this is the clearest water. And I put that trolling motor down, and I started, graphing around. I started scanning. I started casting, and there was zero activity. There was no life anywhere. And so what I started thinking was, and so I didn't spend much time there, and I didn't catch a fish there. What I started thinking was, the bait in Florida, it's not the fact that the bass don't want dirty water, okay, or care about dirty water. It's the fact that the bait in Florida don't like or survive in that dirtier water. And so, I mean, it was like a barren land, right? So it's the bass that are moving to find the bait that puts you in that clear water all the time. And so with that being said, the next thing is you're trying to get yourself bigger fish than the average guy, right, to have a good tournament finish. And this is where it comes into learning how a big fish behaves in Florida and how to get a bite, right, from a big fish. And so what Bradley and I were talking about was I would watch these fish come up to my jerkbait, and when I talk about the big ones, I'm talking about the over fives. The five, I probably casted at 24 in 3 days, 8 to 10 pounders, okay? And I had them, within this close to my jerkbait. I come back with a scale or whatever. But the big ones would come in Florida. They come up, and if you get them following this way, it's not good. You gotta get up above them, and you gotta get them like this, and they'll do this movement right here. They turn vertical like a crappie will, and they get this little wag tail thing going on like that, and they put that jerkbait. I don't have a jerkbait, but I got this thing right here. They put it right in between their eyes, and they just look at it, and they don't attack the bait when they're in this position like northern bass do. And what I was talking with Bradley about is my theory is the more northern strain fish when you get away from Florida, or even Florida fish when they're away from the Florida environment in that dirty water and everything, they'll use their lateral lines. So you can give them a thump, you can give them a harder movement, you can give them, and then they'll attack that. But in Florida, they're getting it right between those big old eyeballs that they got. And I don't think they don't use their lateral lines the same way that they do in other parts of the world. They use that sight to feed, and they get so accustomed to feeding by sight, they don't want to get put in a position where they're feeding with their lateral lines. It's just more comfortable for them to drift around and find clear water and go feed by sight and not by lateral lines. And so when I started realizing that, that's when I started, putting myself consistently around where the bigger fish were at in Florida. Now, I didn't catch them in the tournament day. I got a couple bites. I pulled a couple big ones off, but I sure got them in practice, and then I saw them in tournament day, and I mean, I was just inches away from having, an 8-pounder every single day, including the final day. And, if somehow I would have broke into 3 of them, I would have had a monster sack. So I put myself around them based off of that information that we're talking about.
One, that is fascinating. And 2, follow-up question. You said in the afternoon those fish started biting, committing to that jerkbait. What was the difference in the afternoon? Was it the wind picked up, current flow, or is it just their mood improved? Because since they're biting off of sight, what do you feel like caused them to change from nosing up to the bait to actually committing?
So to make sure I'm perfectly fair how I'm going to answer this, I'm not fishing around the grass, okay?
Yeah.
So this answer could be completely different for the grass fish. Most likely the guys in the grass would be like, this is the complete opposite of what they got them going early in the morning. They felt comfortable to get. But away from the grass, I think those fish love the sun, okay? They've got a lot more mushy bottom. When you got a lot of heat retaining and mushy bottom, there's a lot of time it's anaerobic, it's not healthy. I think they like to come up real high and get that sun on their back, and maybe they're warming their bellies, you know what I mean? And I think water temperature is just a huge, huge factor in Florida. And when you're talking about the difference between 49 degrees and all of a sudden 55 degrees, they've been freezing, and then you get one little section that's calm that goes to 57, and there's only a window of about an hour in the day that it does that. the bait start moving around, the crappie are running everywhere. The whole world, the activity is just, you can just see the whole environment's really active. And when I say they go from, coming to sniff at a jerkbait to now they're actually, attacking it, that's what I'm talking about. Like, you have like an hour window, and who knows, if I had more time to fish, I actually left those fish that were biting really good because I thought I didn't have enough time to walk up. So
okay, I want to equate this to you, Bradley, because I know you fish brush piles on Grand, and I grew up fishing Dardanelle. That was like my home lake, and we had ledges and brush piles out there, and the piles out there in like 6 foot of water, so they're shallow piles. You have shell beds out there too, stuff like that. You'll find in the summertime, middle of July on Dardanelle, 90% of tournaments get one from 2 to 3 o'clock on a pile. You're going to be on a hard channel ledge, and the way I would find those fish is I would graph with 2D sonar, find the big gizzard shad, the 5 to 8 inch gizzard shad. I'd identify them with my 2D and down imaging because I could tell the difference between them and the thread fin. And what would happen is that those thread fin or the gizzards would sit out in that channel all day long, and then in the afternoon, I think what was happening is that there was an algae bloom on the surface of the water up on top by these brush piles, and those fish wouldn't actually be in the pile, or the gizzard shad wouldn't be in the pile, they'd be up past the pile in like 3-4 foot of water, sometimes on shell, sometimes just like on the bottom. And you would only get these big bass to come out of that brush pile to actually feed when it was like 2 o'clock and those shad were up there. You could drag a worm in those piles for 3 hours, and sometimes you get lucky and catch one big one, but you could see them in there with your side imaging diamonds. You could see the fish in the piles, so they're there, but they only fed when those gizzard shad moved up. Do you think that is similar to what they were doing in Florida, like John's theory is maybe that's not just a Florida thing, maybe it's one of those things where as the shad get more active in a specific area, they are more likely to feed, but it's almost like if you can find out where those bass are, you then just have to identify when the shad are active, not so much worry about when the bass are active. If you could identify, hey, the shad are here at one point, and then when they move up, because that's what I would always do. I would figure out, oh, the shad are not in the channel anymore. They're probably up on this drop. And so paying attention more to the shad may be a key to unlocking a lot of these fish across the country. What are your thoughts there?
I think that, like we've talked about this whole show, that Florida happens really fast, and it is a heat, and it's a difference that sets off the whole ecosystem from probably the plankton on, because the plankton is what the shad are feeding on.
Yeah.
But as everything warms, and like I say, Florida is just such a weird place because it happens just like that. And where we live in this part of the country, and I don't even know what to call us. Are we the South? Are we the South Midwest? I know we're not the true South, but we're definitely not Northerners. But anyway, it takes a little bit longer, right? Because we have some depth and things to our system. But 100%, it is. It doesn't have to be 5 degrees to make a difference to a wildlife animal, especially a cold-blooded animal. And it starts with plankton and the shad and the movement. 100%. I definitely agree. And those gizzard shad are a big deal in our part of the country because, I mean, that's what the big ones really, really, really like. They like gizzards. That's why guys have caught them on spinner baits and on the bank for so long, because that's where those gizzards live. And they have a fancy for them. There's no doubt. And I'm sure the more mature fish, they really do enjoy them. Oh, yeah. I'm a big gizzard shad fan myself because I like to beat the bank with spinner bait. Well, I like seeing gizzards flipping.
That's the thing that's crazy. I mean, obviously, you guys travel around the country. I know we've been talking forever, but I think it's really cool to see you guys do so well across all these states, because obviously when you go up north, you got to figure out the goby, the alewife, the yellow perch, all those different things they feed on. Then you have to figure out the blueback heron. You have to figure out the different, if you have tilapia or something in Florida, something crazy, or you have all these different forage types all over. And in Florida, I'm sure there's different. I know that there's like these little swimming swordfish thingy minnows. They're like the pencil needlefish. So you got all these like random forage that you have to figure out. And like one thing I've talked with Rick Clun all the time, and we've had some videos on my channel. I talk to Rick like once a month, and he always says that the number one mistake he always felt he made throughout his career is he spent 30 to 40 years studying the bass. And he should have spent 30 to 40 years studying what the bass are feeding on. Because what the bass feed on dictates their behavior almost 100%. And whether that's crawfish, whether that's whatever it is, if you can understand what the forage is doing and think that way, the bass are just going to react to that. And I have a whole theory on how the thermocline, why bass move to the back of the creeks, because the thermocline affects the shad and how that affects them. I have a whole bunch of theories on all this stuff, but like, obviously in my perspective, I only fish around here, so I don't have the experience to understand these other forage types. But for you guys at home, if you have the ability, focus on the forage, focus on the brim, the bluegill. Like, I love fishing brim beds nowadays, like finding brim up shallow. That's my new, I haven't made videos about that yet because I don't like making videos until I fully understand something. But last year, Bradley, oh my God, I had some crazy days on some brim beds, like the little bit deeper brim beds, but like I haven't figured it out.
The ones you're side imaging that everybody can't see.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Like on Grand and other places, I haven't made a video about it yet because I like to know what I'm talking about before I just throw stuff out there. But yeah, that's so cool. And I know I've gone off on a tangent there, but guys,
no, dude, you haven't, because you hit it dead on. Because like blueback, I joke about it all the time. It took me a decade. I got a buddy down at Georgia on Clarks Hill, and he teases me about it. But he said it took you 10 years just to learn how to spell blueback, and he's right. Those things are so different that it changes everything. So like you, Johnny, like I've fished around here in Arkansas and Texas. First tournament I had down there at Clarks Hill, it's right after the spawn, basically post spawn. But I mean, there's still some sight fish and stuff. And they're like, you got to go chase the schoolers. You got to go chase the schoolers. They're out on the main lake points and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, I'm looking at all these beds in here. They haven't gone far. You know how it is. Our water comes up. We get in the bushes. We flip. Well, they're schoolers. Well, we have schoolers too, right? Grand Lake has them. We have them all over. But generally speaking, the schoolers and post spawn and from there throughout the summer, especially in August, September, those aren't tournament winning fish. Those are limit fish, right? Even down to Rayburn. That's what they are. Dude, it is the biggest fish in the chain with the bluebacks. And it's not each other to get out there to those bluebacks. They race. They're out there as quick as they can possibly get, and it's the biggest fish in the system. And it's just amazing. Amazing. They act like stripers to me. They're like our stripers that we have at Beaver, Texoma, our places like that.
For sure. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I wanted to do like a whole video series on learning these different types of forages and figuring it out, because that's something something so hard. I want to put that into the app too if I could, but it's impossible to get good info on that unless you have experience. Like, that's the thing, is I've learned about a lot of the forage we have around here, but like John's saying, the forage act differently on different lakes, and there's different forage on different lakes, and it's so specific. So that just hats off to you guys for going and fishing on all these different lakes all around the country and competing, because that's without knowing all that stuff, it's just like you're at a huge disadvantage to all the locals and all the guys who fish there for years, just getting that knowledge. Not that maybe some of them know what is actually happening, but they at least understand that behavior. So that's super cool. Good deal. So guys, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. No, everyone wants us to keep going. They also said this should have been a pay-per-view. Apparently, we'd be rivaling the UFC right now. So, we need to. Dana White might come calling pretty soon if you guys want to, get this up for auction. But guys seem to be really loving this all. So appreciate you guys joining and just giving some great information. I know you guys are going to want you guys to come back on, so anytime you are welcome to come, because it seems like these, everyone in the chat's loving this. We got a bunch of people on watching, so really appreciate everyone who's tuning in. And I guess one thing I want to do, I always like to do this for our guests, but if there's any sponsors or anything you're working on, any projects you're working on, Bradley or John, anything you want to shout out to the audience, this would be a great time.
I got one.
Go for it.
I started the YouTube thing about a month and a half ago. I did doing my best Bradley Hallman, Johnny Schultz impression. So go check out the Hookup with Soukup on YouTube. About a month and a half in, I think we got like 10 videos dropped, some fish catching, some talking. And go check it out. Definitely, if you like the live scope talk too, there's definitely some good live scope videos.
Awesome. Bradley, got anything for us?
No, I was going to plug you, Johnny, but everybody's already here. How can I plug you for the guys that are already here?
Well,
I don't have anything, guys. I don't. I'm glad that Soukup's joined us on the YouTube, dude. I really am. I'm excited. I'm excited to work with him, do some stuff. You know how you got I got a little my deal on the bottom where you're like your YouTube page, whatever. I don't think that many people actually ever get there, John, but you're actually on it as one of my boys. You're already up there. Yeah, my boys. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's where I aspire to be. I aspire to be one of the boys one day. Maybe.
Oh, you're coming, dude. It's coming.
Hey, I'm starting to wear a rounder bill on my cap, so people are liking me better. I used to wear my flat bill caps. I have my baby cheeks. I'm losing my baby cheeks, so I'm maybe need to grow a beard. That's the next step to really join the boys. Good deal. Well, guys, we're going to have a bunch of really great guests. I'm trying to bring more these tournament guys on. Next week, we're actually going to have Harvey Horn on the stream, another Bass Tank Pro. We're going to have Harvey. I've actually fished a junior state championship with Harvey when I was 9 years old in Arkansas. He was my boat captain. He was in a junkie boat. Like, I've known him forever. So Harvey's a good buddy of mine. We're gonna have him, and then
that's another beard, by the way.
I know another beard.
Another beard. You may have to grow a beard, dude. You may have to do it.
I didn't have to. I put my flippers stash. I grew out a mustache a while back because I was doing a challenge against Randy, and I was looking at all these guys. Like, if you look back in the 80s and 90s, you got Biffle, you got Hank Parker, you got all these guys who were just rocking. Paul Elias, dude, yeah. So, like, I was thinking if I had the flipper stash, it was going to work, and I lost the challenge by 2 ounces, and so I cut the stash because I was like, well, this doesn't help me catch him. It doesn't matter. So, that is a good deal. But, yeah, guys, really appreciate you joining me tonight. Shout out to everyone on the stream. Sorry we didn't answer any questions or anything like that. I was too busy soaking in all this bass fishing juice over here. So,
dude, if you want to knock a couple of them out, get it.
Okay, let's do that. If you guys have some questions, throw them in here as well, because I'm gonna have to go back up, and it looks like everyone is just saying loving this. When someone says we need to get Castledine on here, I think that would be great too if we could get Todd. I don't know if he would do it. He likes to keep his information closer to the vest than John and Bradley, but he's a really good guy too. Let's see here.
All he does is throw a frog anyway, so I don't.
Exactly.
How many frog stories can you tell?
Let's see here.
Gotta get a jab in, right, Brad?
Okay, so
I get so much about the only live scoper. I gotta throw a jab. Somebody.
Well, hey, we get enough jabs about the live scope here on this live stream when Randy's on. That was still great when you and Randy went after. That was a good. So, Bradley, I gotta tell you a story. So I brought Randy Blockett, Mr. Anti-Live Scope, against John, and we had them on the live stream to battle it out, and it was the most cordial, like, civil, like, these guys were, like, talking, they're like, oh, man, you're great and everything. I was trying to instigate it, I was trying to, like, draw some blood. These two are just the nicest guys ever, and I'm like, man, it was, like, super anticlimactic there. Let's see here. One question here for you, John. What is your favorite live scope bait to start with? If you had to pick one bait to start with a live scope, what would it be?
It's probably a spoon.
A spoon? Oh,
it's probably a slab spoon to be more specific.
Got it.
And I can go in depth, but the reason is when you're practicing on these lakes, you got 3 days. You need to know real quick if that's a bass or if that's a striper or if that's a crappie down there. And you can catch almost every species there is on a spoon, so I can tell real quick what's down there.
Awesome. I was in the boat with you, and you were you spooned one off a stump on Keystone Lake with 1.5 feet of water visibility, and the boat was in like 8 feet of water, and you pitched this half-ounce slab spoon, Bradley, against the stump, hopped at once, got like a 2.5 pounder. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this guy doing?
Now you know why when he calls me, he goes, dude, I'm catching like 25 a day. I'm like, I'm fine up here. I've only had 2 bites a day, but I see some beds. I'm good.
Awesome. Next question for you guys is, are you guys going to be at the Classic?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. We got a booth. We got us a nice hotel. We do a big spread. Bradley gets to enjoy that too. We bring everybody we can out there. So we'll have that booth, and I know Bradley will be going around to all his sponsors. He'll be going around sponsors. But I'll be mostly at the Bass Tank booth is where I'll be, mostly.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I am probably not going to be able to make it this year because I have to work on this deep dive app. We have launches and stuff for that, guys. What? It's been crazy with that. I'm literally like, I'm working like 80 hours a week with this app and fish development and stuff like that. So if I go to the Classic for a week, I'll be too far behind on anything. Someone's asking me, so I had this theory, Bradley and John, that I could fish a jig, a crankbait, and a jerkbait. And I was kicking around the idea that if I threw those 3 baits all year this year, and those are the only 3 baits I threw, could I catch enough fish? And would I be able to be successful every fishing trip if I just had a jig, a crankbait, and a jig, crankbait, jerkbait? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, okay, here in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, probably. But I don't think that that's a very good strategy for anywhere outside of these 3 states. So I kind of decided against it because I didn't think that maybe it would be the best teaching for everyone else, especially in other parts of the country. But I know that would be fine also if I'm going out on like a Thursday on Grand. But, that's something. Okay, this is a great question for you guys. I see so many guys nowadays, especially when you fish the opens, these big tournaments, everybody's throwing a spinning rod. I saw you throwing a spinning rod on Louisville Lake, Bradley, on brush piles, and I'm like, what is this dude doing? Everyone else is back in the bushes flipping, and you're out with a spinning rod. Everyone's got the spinning rod in their hand. Is that just because of fishing pressure? Is that just because like that's the only thing you can get bit on? Like, what's the deal? Because I've never seen so many spinning rods as I have in the last 3 years.
I think it's boat pressure. I think it's boat pressure, tournament pressure. We've all talked about growing the sports, but my gosh, I mean, you take a lake like Rayburn, Louisville, there just isn't much. But dude, it's pressure, 110%. I mean, look at the Ned rig and the success it's had. I mean, I can remember the first time a guy crawled in the back of my boat with a shaky head, and I'd never seen one before, and that was on Grand Lake in a tournament. He was actually from Beaver, which is kind of where that thing started, and man, he laid the smackdown on them, and big ones, and I just couldn't believe it because I was throwing a jig in front of him, and they should have eaten it. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was like, "Hey, dude, you got another one of them rods, a 6-pound test line? I'll try it." He's like, "Yeah, I got 3 of them." But yeah, I mean, it's pressure. Those fish have seen it. It's something new. It's something different. That's what it is.
I think I got another theory. To it.
Give us the juice,
agree.
John. Give it to us.
I agree with the pressure. Not arguing. I agree. But I'm gonna second that too. With the electronics and the advancement of fishermen, I think we're fishing for a lot more inactive fish than we used to. I think we used to power fish a lot because you want to come across the active fish, and you didn't know there was other fish down there. And now guys are getting a lot better with their electronics, and they're like, wait, I know they're there.
Yeah.
And there's 200 boats around the corner, so I'm going to do what I can to try to get a bite right here. So I think there's a little bit of a mixture between, the pressure probably on the bar scale is 80% of it. Then there's a small scale of we're fishing for inactive fish. And then I think the third is almost like an A-rig in that we're fishing for fish that just haven't been fished for as much in times past. So there's different tool sets needed to target those fish.
Let me tell a story right here. I learned something. Like every time we go on the water, we learn, right? And back to Florida again, that conger that I had the second day that was a local, he only put about 4 digits in the boat that day, but one of them was a brush pile in the middle of the lake, and it wasn't anywhere around grass. And we drive up to it, and I drop the trolling motor in the water, and boom, I hit it with live scope. I'm like, hey, man, there it is. Let me get downwind from it. I get set up on it, and as I turn, I'm like, dude, we're going to catch them. Because there's and I'm counting, there's 9 or 10 of them that I can see on the pile. And not only are they on the pile, they're positioned to eat. And you guys know what I'm talking about. They're not there's 2 of them sitting on a pile on it. There's 2 or 3 in front of it, and they're not just stacked right in front of it. They're spaced out coming from the front of it. And there's another 3 or 4 in the back of it. We're going to catch fish. And we do. We catch a couple. Just throwing Texas rig, the typical speed worm deal down there in Texas. We each catch one. And he tells me, he's like, man, usually, me and my team partners, spot we got, we pull up on it, but we can only catch a couple, and then we can't catch anything else. He's like, you can leave and come back a couple hours later and catch a couple more. Dude, they're still sitting there the same way. And I fished enough brush piles. I'm like, dude, we're going to keep catching these fish. And he's like, well, how can you tell? And I was like, by the way they're on the graph. I can tell by the way they're positioned. We're going to keep catching them, but we can't throw a Texas rig worm and a 20-pound test line. I was like, dude, I got something. I'm fixing to catch every fish in this pile. They ain't seen it. I'm fixing to light them up. And I've got another rod for you too. We're both going to catch them. He's like, man, I can't wait to see this. So I get down the bottom of the boat, and I get my little 4.5-inch little bitty finesse worm out, and put it on a drop shot, 8-pound test line, pitch it up there past that pile, drag it right up to them, and I got it sitting right in their face, I know they haven't seen this. I know they haven't seen this. Dude, this pile is in the middle of Toho. They don't touch it. And I'm like, something's wrong. I missed the pile. I throw it back out there and I watch it go down my live scope like right in front of a fish. And then I've got 4 more space before I even get to the pile. And I'm like, pull, let it sit, shake it, let it just sit, pull. And I'm like, that's wood. So now into the pile. I know I've pulled it through 4 fish. I get up on top of the pile. Dude, they don't touch it. And it drove me crazy. I spent too long there. I spent 45 minutes on something I'm just sitting looking at, throwing at. Because I could still see them and they're sitting in an active. I tried jerk baits over them. I tried everything I could possibly think of. And he's like, dude, just leave and come back in an hour. We'll catch them again. It drove me crazy, but yeah, spinning a rod, you know what I mean? But it didn't work.
John, I talked to you about this the other day. I called John so excited about this new technique I figured out, and then he was like, oh yeah, I've been doing that for 5 years. And I'm like, screw you, John. Those fish I was showing you on those trees earlier, I have a video actually coming out tomorrow on my YouTube channel. You guys can check it out. And I actually have the live scope of I track the live scope and I record it, and you can actually I mark the bass and the bait, and I call it out, so you guys can watch that video.
That's cool.
But what I was doing is I was out on this lake, the power plant lake. They're spending those trees. I saw them down there. I knew they're bass. Threw a jerkbait over those fish. Nothing. Pitched a drop shot at him like you were doing, shaking a drop shot up to him, and then trying to get him to bite. Nothing. Couldn't get him to bite anything. What I tied on was that Neko rig, and put the Neko rig on there with basically it's a wacky rig worm with a nail weight, and it was a 6.5-inch cut tail worm, Yamamoto. I pitched that thing down there, and what I noticed is the first time I pitched it to those fish and they were suspended halfway in those trees, they would, if I hit him right in front of their face and dropped it, they would follow the bait, and they would start following it, but then right before he hit the bottom, they would lose interest and swim back up. So what I did is I changed the weight of that worm enough so that when I finally pitched out to him, it fell slow enough where they would keep following it all the way down to the bottom. Then when that bait was sitting on the bottom, I dead sticked it there for 5 to 8 seconds, and finally they would pick it up. And what I had to do was get that bait to fall perfectly slow enough that it would keep their attention but never touch it. I couldn't move the bait. Once I made the cast, it had to just move perfectly down to the bottom, sit there on the bottom and dead stick that worm on the bottom, and then they would get it. And I caught 2 5s, a 4.5, I broke a 7, hammering them on those fish. But something about that bait, it was just that retrieve on it. And I might never be able to replicate that again. You guys know there's sometimes you just find a retrieve or an approach that works that one day and never happens again. But it's
now you got me wanting to hit that those same fish in Florida. I'd have spent another.
But it's all about the weight of that worm. And I think that I talked to Matt Steffen, who another tour pro, and he says he actually does that for the smallmouth and largemouth up north, but he does it with a weightless worm, and he's found the same thing. Pitch that thing out, watch him follow it down live scope, dead stick it on the bottom for sometimes 10 or 15 seconds, and they'll eat that thing. But it's something about that bait dead on the bottom, not moving. And if I moved it an inch, those fish would swim away. You had to just it was so weird. So that's just that's something about fishing that it's crazy, because once you do that, you're like, oh man, now I did the same thing. I'm like, I want to go now to Beaver and graph trees for 6 hours, find fish, and I want to try that on those fish. That's just what I'm thinking. Good deal. Let's see here. Okay. There's
just send John outside to tell Alex to come in.
John's getting called. I think we probably should call it a night, guys. I don't want to get these
it's
guys.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, you guys will stay all night. I know I'll stay all night because I'm loving this conversation. I don't know if we should, for the sake of your tournament careers, maybe we should stop talking before we give up all the juice. Question for you, John. This is a great question. This is a great question for John and for Bradley. I actually want to see Bradley. I know you've heard this from John before, but I want to hear Bradley's reaction to this. What's the shallowest you've ever caught a fish on live scope, John?
10 inches.
And you saw the fish on live scope and watched him eat it?
It was actually a bedding fish. Yeah.
And I remember you told me a tournament that it was a BFL. I don't know if you won it or you finished second or third, where you were flipping laydowns in 2 foot of water on the Arkansas River with a live scope. Have you heard the story, Bradley? I'm sure you have heard this, right?
Oh yeah, I've heard it.
Have you ever? Do you do that consistently? Because that's something you've been doing. Like, hey,
Well,
I'm going to.
I've caught one in 10 inches like him as well. The only difference is that mine was sitting over probably 60 foot of water, 10 inches deep. So it was just right at the surface. Mine ate a spook.
Have you done that a lot recently, though, John? Like flipping laydowns with live scope? Like your boat's in 6 foot of water and you're scanning a 2 foot laydown, or is that was that a one off deal?
No, I always scan. It doesn't mean that I always can make it happen. It's just like any tool that you have. But the thing is when I see it and it's happening, then I can get really, really deadly because then I'm using that to help me cover water too. There is absolutely times when, and I tell this story a lot too. When you're breaking new barriers, like there was a time when I came up to a log one time and I pitched up next to it and I'm looking at live scope and I hadn't been getting bit in a while. And I'm going to take a step back and tell you that I had seen a fish on a log earlier in the day and I pitched up to a log, caught the fish. I saw the fish on the live scope and then I started thinking I'm just going to do that forever. Right. And 3 or 4 hours go by and I'm struggling now. I'm not getting bit at all. I'm not seeing fish. And so I'm like, well, there's just the standard log, the Jimmy Houston log pattern. So I go up to this log and I pitch to it, but I happen to have my live scope looking at where I pitched. And all of a sudden a flash comes from deeper water, runs up to the log and pins that. And all of a sudden I'm like, I realize I got him on. I set the hook. And I realized at that moment that I had myth busted some things about some bass. They're not always laying right up next to the log like we think. They're actually using that log as an ambush point, and they're sitting out deep on like a drop where you can't actually see them on any kind of, sonar. But that bait's got to be up there because then that's when they go up and ambush and pinch and attack. So there's situations like that where you can't really use your live scope to target one individual fish, but you can tell the environment of what they're doing and where they're acting. And then you can take it and then pattern that. So when I'm fishing shallow, I'm doing a lot more of an environmental study when I am staring at my graph or when I'm looking at it.
You're stealing my thunder there, John, with the fish off the drop coming up to a piece of cover up shallow. I have videos coming out about that. You stole my thunder there. I've seen that in live scope too. That was
You can clip this out and put me in that video then.
I'll say I heard this before I actually said this. I learned this from John. Go buy LiveScope. Perfect. One more question here, and I'll make this the last question tonight because I do want to respect you guys' time. But this is from Living Missouri Outdoors. It's for you, Bradley. He says, is group therapy for bass fishing the best? And he's kind of referring to you guys when you're in the boat. Calling each other and like during tournaments, talking to each other. Because I see like if I look at like Todd's videos and like your videos sometimes of practice, I'll see you guys on the phone talking to each other and things like that. Do you find that information is helpful? Does it sometimes hurt you? Like I know doc talk obviously hurts, but getting it from a reliable source, is that a valuable part of your process, or is that something that sometimes can lead you astray?
It can still be a negative, even as long as I've done this. Like I said, I know that one tournament a few years ago in Florida, whenever all my roommates, we were all in Griffin, and it was a bad deal. But I'm pretty aware of it. Like I said, this week, John was talking with some other anglers besides myself, and I know that he probably noticed it too. He could talk with me pretty open, and we're pretty much bouncing. He's thinking the same thing I'm thinking. I'm thinking if I've got to go do that, he's kind of giving me some ideas of what I kind of need to look for. But like I'm not just abandoning everything I'm doing at this moment, even though I've only had 2 bites in the last 2 days to go run and try to duplicate what he's doing. There's a reason for what I'm doing, even though it's not successful yet. And he's just trying to get a feel of how good is that other deal, that shallow bite, the bite that you read about all the time in Florida that I'm not spending any time doing, because I am getting bites and it does seem productive, but I want to talk to somebody that I know is telling me the truth and is pretty good at doing that so that it can validate that I can just keep spending more time doing this. So I think for that aspect, it works pretty good. You know what I mean? And if you've got that understanding, but man, for me, honestly, it takes a pretty strong relationship and a lot of faith in their fishing ability and to be able to find fish for me to establish that rapport. And I don't just have it with everybody. That's why I don't talk to a lot of people. I've got enough faith that if I go out there for a day and I've only had 2 bites all day, I ain't the only one out there struggling. And I know that. And I'm okay with that. If I don't talk to anybody else, that's fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Awesome. I said last question. One more question. There's a couple on this. But John, do you ever use perspective mode on Livescope?
Yeah, I use perspective mode, but honestly, I use a lot when I'm crappie fishing. When I'm practicing, finding good examples of if I'm in an area where I'm looking for shell beds, or if I'm looking for brim beds, or if I'm looking for scanning, in other words, in real shallow water, or if I'm looking for crappie beds, steak beds. Those areas where you really can't get on your big motor to graph your side imaging. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it is a very good tool, and it's a tool where I was one of the first ones to put it on my boat at the same time when you have 2 lives. Because what I found for me is I'm quick enough and I have a good enough memory with just standard live scope that picture is already in my head. So I don't always need it where a lot of guys need it. So it's kind of my answer kind of may shy some guys away from using it, but I think for some guys it's a good tool. For me, there's a lot of times I think I'm getting a lot more information than they're getting just out of kind of the standard live scope use. So.
One thing that got me excited about potentially trying perspective mode, one of my buddies, I don't know if you've ever fished Lake Millwood down in southern Arkansas, but it's a shallow mud hole of a lake, and one of our best spots that he has out there and that I've fished before is there's a patch of water willow, and just out in front of the water willow there's a shell bed. And he sent me a picture with his phone. He recorded perspective mode where you just saw these giant fish swimming in front of the grass. You saw the grass, you see the shell bed, you see the fish swimming out on the shell bed, and he's like, there's 7 fish, and he has a picture of him holding up 5 of them. He has a limit that's like 27 pounds, and you go back up there and you see 2 left on the perspective mode. It's really crazy. Like, he literally caught those 5 fish, and it was pretty cool. So it makes me want to kind of use it, because like you said, when you can't you can side image most of the time, but like that stuff, it's hard sometimes to get a good side imaging image in 2 foot of water on those real tricky areas like out in front of water willow and stuff like that. There's just sometimes where you don't get enough definition in that to really see what's going on. So awesome. Well, guys, I'm gonna let you go now. But again, appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much. We gave out a lot of great juice. You're welcome back anytime if you guys ever have a spare moment, spare Tuesday. We'd love to have you back and keep talking about fishing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, man. Appreciate being here.
Guys, thanks for joining. We had like 300 different people concurrent. We had like 3,000 people tune in tonight. So
cool.
Across things. So I think we got some good reactions. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday. We'll have Harvey Horn, another Bassmaster Elite Series Pro, on to another Bass Tank Pro to come talk about shallow water fishing. We're going to talk about junior Bassmasters back in the day when him and I, he was my boat captain. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. So it'll be a great show. Tune in next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, same place. Make sure to subscribe to Fish the Moment Live if you don't want to miss any of these live streams going forward. Thanks again, guys, and have a great night.